right. Well, welcome everyone to today's Industry Connect. And today's Industry Connect, for those of you who haven't seen our podcast and YouTube series, we bring some really interesting people to have a conversation about their experience in the sector. And today we've got an international flavour. So it's really, really good to be here with you today. First of all, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we meet on today, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge any Indigenous people who watch our webinar series and interview series, and I want to welcome you with open arms to this meeting and conversation. AHI is a passionate supporter of reconciliation. For those that don't know me, my name is Mark Henderson, and I'm the CEO of the Australasian Housing Institute, or as we're called very, very broadly, AHI. This evening, the international flavour is I'm meeting with Gavin Smart, and Gavin's the Chief Executive at the Chartered Institute of Housing, and Gavin joined the CIH in 2012 as a Director of Policy and Practice, and was made Deputy Chief Executive in 2014 and Chief Executive in 2019. He's 25 miles from Oxford. He's experienced 13 weeks or so in lockdown, and it's a great privilege to welcome you, Gavin, here today to the AHI Industry Connect.
Hi, Mark. Good to be with you.
Yeah, Gavin. The last time we chatted, we were early in the COVID-19 isolation, and it's been what we could describe here as a trying time. No doubt the same for you, your colleagues, and the sector more broadly.
Yeah, no, I think it has been a pretty difficult time. I think what's interesting is probably when we last spoke, Mark, we were just at the beginning of the lockdown process. I think for CIH ourselves, but even more so for people working on the front line for housing organisations across the UK. When we last spoke, it was probably a moment of kind of crisis management. We were trying to work out what do we need to do? How can we do it? How can we do it in a way that means we're looking after our people and looking after tenants and residents in the homes that we manage? My sense is that moment of crisis has probably passed. We found ways of working, but those ways of working are very different from the ways that we may have been working in the past. They've created some challenges which I think we've broadly been able to find a way around, and others which are kind of enduring and ongoing. And I think what everybody's really conscious of is that there's a lot of talk about the new normal. We're probably not in the new normal yet. We're in this kind of sort of half-life where we're managing in expectation that things will be different at some point in the future, presumably when there's better treatment, vaccines, all of that kind of stuff available, and nobody really knows how long the half-life is going to go on for. And that's creating its own kind of pressures.
Yeah, I think we're in that what I describe as the no man's land, where we're wondering whether the new normal's what we're experiencing now, or we're just going to go back to where we've come from. So it's an interesting kind of period that we're in. Gavin, I think probably it'd be beneficial for our viewers here in Australia and New Zealand just to talk a little bit about the CIH. Could you give us a little bit of background on the Chartered Institute of Housing for us?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with what we do now and maybe a little bit of history as well, because perhaps that will help people to understand where we're coming from as well. So CIH is the professional body for housing in the UK. That means a number of things, actually, so it's worth rehearsing them. So first of all, it means that our membership is individual, not organisational. Mm-hmm. We are almost unique in the UK landscape because we operate across all tenures, all sectors, mm-hmm. and we also operate across the whole of the UK because, of course, actually, as it is in Australia, housing is under the UK's own devolution settlement. Housing is now devolved policy. So housing policy is really quite different in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland from how it is in England. So we're unusual that we're cross-sector, that we are cross-nation. We also have an international membership. We've got a very well-established branch in Hong Kong. We have a nascent CIH Canada, CIH China, and the beginnings of a professional membership in the Republic of Ireland as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of what we do. Why are we the Chartered Institute? Very kind of strange, typically sort of British sort of thing with the
Mm-hmm.
Chartered Institute, because we have a parliamentary charter which was awarded to us towards the end of the 1980s, early 1990s. That affects what we do, because not only are we a charity, which means that we have to be politically neutral in the way that all charities do, but the Royal Charter also requires we act in the public interest. Yeah. So that does affect the way we do some of our work, especially our policy work. Our policy work is not as straightforward as us saying all of our members think this is a great idea, we should do it. Yeah. We have to satisfy ourselves that it's in the public interest as well as in the narrow interest of the profession. CIH, I would say, exists to do three things. We exist for our members. We mm-hmm. exist them to provide the support, the services, the guidance that they need. We exist to train, educate, and qualify the housing profession and the housing sector, and we exist to be the public voice of housing. That's our kind of policy work. And a final bit of history: we're just over 100 years old, and we trace our roots all the way back to Octavia Hill. And Octavia Hill now is best really remembered for founding the National Trust in the UK, a big sort of landowning charity. But actually, she's also the kind of the grandmother of housing management as practiced across most of the developed globe, actually. And it was women housing managers who trained with Octavia Hill, who started a thing called the Institute of Society of Women Housing Managers. Right. And that's one of the bodies which we trace our history back to. Yeah. Through an amalgamation with the Society of Housing Managers in the West Midlands to become the Institute of Housing, and then subsequently the Chartered Institute of Housing. So we trace our roots back a long way, and that's both a privilege and sometimes a challenge. Yeah, long histories bring with them bonuses and costs.
Yeah, absolutely, and a rich history. Just tell me, just on your members, Gavin, how many members do you support?
So we have about, so there's different ways of counting our members, but we have about 10,000 paying members in the UK, which is, if you think about the core of CIH in the UK, that's probably the best way to think about it. We have a number of student members. Students membership is free while they're studying. We ask them to make a choice to join when they qualify. And then we have our international membership as well. But the conversation we're having today, I think, is reflecting a lot on the UK. The UK membership is about 10,000 paying members of CIH.
Yeah, and when you say provision of support, we understand education, training, certification, and the like. But when we say member support, what are the kind of services that you provide your members in the way of support?
I guess a few things. So we are one of the places that our members look to for good practice advice. And I think about our good practice advice as being about a few things. So some of it is patently what you would imagine good practice is. This is our understanding of what the best way to do X, Y, and Z looks like. Mm-hmm. That's part of what we do. We actually do a fair bit of, we've read it so you don't have to. I know your government has got the same hobbies as ours, which is churning out endlessly very, very long, quite boring, quite detailed documents that increasingly busy people on the front line don't have the time to read or to digest. Yeah. Part of our job is to do that. Part of our job is to provide forums for members to network and engage with each other. Because actually part of the challenge of good practice work is there's so much good practice work we could do relative to the size of CIH as an organisation that some of our job is actually to put people in touch with each other, and that's part of the support role that we play. We have a mentoring scheme where we provide a framework to support people who think about how they want to develop their careers. So we try to cover as much ground as possible. The challenge for us is we're relatively small in comparison with our membership. So that networking function is really, really important, because to a very large degree, we want to build a profession that is kind of self-supporting as well as looking towards the institute.
Yeah. So let's just explore that a little bit. How does that translate when you say you're much smaller relatively to the size or relative to the size of your membership? Is that just in people numbers? Is that what you
It's in
mean?
people. It's in people numbers. So
Yeah.
CIH is about across the whole of the UK, we're about 95 people, which sounds quite big, and is quite big.
Mm.
But quite a big chunk of that actually is in our education function,
Yeah.
because it just requires quite a lot of people to manage and to run a program that deals with the numbers of students that we have. But even if 100% of our staffing component was simply facing members delivering member services, that's 100 people for 10,000 paying members.
Yeah.
So you've got to be targeted in terms of what you do. But what we try to do is to work with our members and work with the sector to move quickly to address topics which have a kind of salience that are important now. So
Yeah.
in recent years, we've done quite a lot of work on things like antisocial behaviour, where that became a kind of an issue that was at the forefront of people's minds. We did a lot of work to help our members and the sector manage their way through quite a radical programme of reform of the welfare benefit structure in the UK. We've been pushing out a lot of good practice advice and guidance to do with dealing with the pandemic. So we try to respond to the things that we understand are the salient things that our members are thinking about now, and that moves over time, that changes over time.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to be agile. You have to be ear to the
Yeah.
ground. You've got to be on the front foot. No, that's really good. Now, what's an atypical member of the CIH look like in your mind? And has that changed in the 5 or so years that you have been with the institute?
Probably hasn't changed that much. So the age profile of our membership has got slightly younger.
Mm.
I think that's to do with demographic change. That's to do with a cohort of people retiring. But probably a kind of an average, if there's any such thing as an average member of CIH, they would work in the affordable housing sector, because the majority of our members come from
Yeah.
either a local authority or housing association background. They would work in that bit of the industry. They would most likely be working in a kind of tenant and resident facing role, or within a bit of the organisation that's most closely focused towards kind of housing management, asset management, estate management. We have members who work in development teams as well, but maybe a bit less of that. We've got members in finance teams as well, but probably a bit less of that because they're typically qualified finance professionals. So yeah, somebody involved at the heart of the business of running an organisation whose purpose is providing good quality housing and the services that are related to it.
Mm. And just on that, and there, I take your point. There's no average or typical kind of member as we experience here in our sector in Australia and New Zealand. But what are the I suppose what's the attraction to go into the housing sector? Do you find for your members? What's the thing that draws them in? Because the reason why I asked the question, Gavin, is we have to play a bigger role in promoting the sector as a really good destination for a good quality career. You get a lot out of it, a lot of job satisfaction out of it, and that's something we're really at the early stages of putting together and developing. So, what is it for the new entrant into your sector over there? What attracts them to become a housing professional?
So I think we're having very, very similar conversations to ones do. The things that I think are the things that attract people, and the things that people talk about, are that it is a profession with a purpose. It's a profession that creates value, creates social value, that has an outcome that does good. That's the thing that people talk about the most. The chance to positively impact and to change lives and communities for the better would be the thing that I think all of our members would mention. Interestingly, the profession in the UK at the moment is not exclusively, but to a very large degree, it is a profession of destination, but it typically is not where people first go. They often find housing via a slightly circuitous route and then stay. So there are relatively small numbers of people who study housing at degree level or a kind of college level and know that they want to go into a career in housing. Lots of people in the UK find their way into housing coming from related professions, or they find their way in one way or another. But what's amazing is the degree of stickability. People arrive and they love it and they stay.
Yeah.
But the challenge for us as the professional body is that we would love more people to know about housing first up and to choose it because they want to choose it rather than arrive by accident. But not all of us, but a lot of us have arrived by a bit by accident, but love it and stay once they arrive.
And do you see, I noted that you've got, and we might just talk about this, a new campaign that you're involved in called Homes at the Heart campaign, which I think is probably a COVID-inspired initiative. Is that an approach to get, the role of housing, better known in the community in your markets?
Yes, it is. I mean, it's predominantly, you're right. It's predominantly a piece of work that we're doing with a number of partner organisations, which is about making the case really for a couple of things. So for absolutely saying housing has a role to play at the heart of the recovery from the impact of the pandemic, both economically and socially. So saying, it's part of the toolkits that government should be looking to use, but it's also actually, it's also trying to shine a light and say, look, what the pandemic showed us was just some of the failings of housing in the UK going into this situation. It's laid bare some of the failings, some of the structural inequalities, some of the ways in which our society was failing some of our members. The very people that we have looked at to help us through the last 3 months, in many cases, are insecurely, unaffordably, and sometimes unhealthily housed. And we and our partner organisations are saying that can't be right. Not only is housing a tool that you can use for economic recovery, you can use for social recovery, but also actually it's a duty we owe to our society to put right what has been shown to be a pretty parlous situation for too many people.
Yeah, and is it an accurate statement? 4 million people in England live in social housing, thereabouts.
Yeah, 4 million households.
Households.
So
yeah.
it's about 400 million properties. So that's average household size about 2.3. So that's 9-10 million.
Yeah. We just had recently, just near where I live, a multi-storey public housing facility building which houses 3,000 residents, just been locked down pretty much overnight. No departing unless it's for absolutely essential needs. We've got the police involved. It feels like they're securing the building so people can't come and go through that. What about the multi-tenant kind of situation, especially in London, where you've got big public housing facilities there in London? How has that gone from a COVID-19 response?
So we haven't seen anything like the lockdown that you're talking about, which I've been reading about actually, which is an extraordinary position to be in. But I think that's probably because we were in a more general lockdown. I think we don't know what happens at this point if we get a very large cluster in a very densely populated kind of housing situation. How would we see the sort of lockdowns that you've seen? We've seen lockdowns in compounds, haven't we, in China and Hong Kong and Singapore. I'm sure it's a possibility. We haven't seen that to date. That's not been one of the issues that we've had to deal with. But I think we're very conscious as we feel our way out of lockdown, that we are likely to see these kind of spikes. You'll have seen in the news that city of Leicester is on a much more restricted lockdown than the rest of the UK.
Yeah.
I don't think we can rule out that we will see more geographically concentrated lockdowns. And certainly one of the debates that's happening, that Homes at the Heart is partly looking to address, is this sense that what the pandemic has laid bare is the degree to which some people's housing situations mean that people are either more or less at risk, and mean that they are either better or worse placed to manage the consequences of having to live in a lockdown. So you and I have spoken before. You'll know that I live in a very unusual situation. I live in a multi-generational household. There are 7 people across 4 generations in my household. Now that's created its own challenges, but one of the huge benefits that's given me is that obviously to house that many people requires finding a building that's quite big, and a building that's quite big typically has got quite a lot of space. And with a huge amount of outdoor space, we're not locked in with only a balcony. So all right, none of my household until this week had left the property for 14 weeks, but at least we had an outside space to be out, to get fresh air, to move around. That's not been the case for everybody. And I think, that is one of the debates which I suspect is going to happen across a lot of developed nations and maybe globally, about what have we learned about what is necessary to live well and to live healthily, even under a lockdown situation. And having really, really restricted space, no outdoor space, has been one of the demarcations of inequality in the UK's experience of COVID.
Yeah, and what about from the perspective of homelessness? So one of our CEOs in one of our early interviews spoke to me about, isolating at home is a great exercise if you've got a home to go to, but people who are on the streets, living rough, very challenging. Yeah, obviously that's similar situation you've got in the UK.
Yeah, so in the UK in particular, we had a program which government launched very quickly called Everybody In, which was to find a way of using hotel and other accommodation to try to find everybody who was homeless and sleeping rough, and to house them. And that was remarkably successful in all sorts of ways. It collected probably 95% of people who would have been sleeping rough, found them a place to stay, provided them with a degree of security and comfort, and yeah, it's been quite an extraordinary experience, I guess. So at one level, I have colleagues who work for organisations like Crisis, one of the big homelessness charities in the UK, saying, this is amazing. We've talked for years about doing this, and that it was achievable, and almost overnight we did it, because if you throw enough resource a problem, you can make a huge difference. The challenge, I think, is what happens next. This situation can't persist forever. How do we move people on to a more permanent housing solution? It would be a disaster if most people who were whose needs are being met by everyone in then ends up back on the streets again. That's not what anybody would want to see. And there are big debates about what are the support services necessary to enable people to manage in a tenancy. And just at the beginning of some of those conversations, and even actually with Everybody In, there were some people for whom that proved too difficult, and they didn't manage to stay, because of personal challenges that they faced. But what's really interesting is are in a moment where, to a significant degree, we have been able to massively reduce the numbers of people living and sleeping rough. And the big debate now is what happens next.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting thing to watch. And from over this way, we'd be keen to learn from what happens next, because I think that's really important. It sounded like a really successful program to date. So, Gavin, you recently, and just to change tact a little bit, when we last spoke, you were gearing up for a virtual conference, which at the time we chatted, you weren't sure where or how successful or not that was going to be. And then I got an email, I subscribed to one of your lists, and got an email saying a third day had been added to the agenda. So based on that, it must have been a successful 3 days.
Yeah, it was very successful. It was great. We probably got around about 220 people in attendance overall, including some of the speakers and exhibitors. I think it worked very well. We were able to bring people. You know, one of the great advantages of doing things online, as we're doing now, you can bring together across distances that are really difficult to do for a physical event. So we had contributors from around the globe, from Australia, Canada, South Africa, Holland. You know, so we were able to start up from the States. We were able to start conversations that would be more difficult to do in a physical environment. I think the event was a great success. We've got a platform that enables us to do that kind of thing. That includes the opportunity to do a bit kind of networking outside of the conference sessions. I think that was useful. And it has a relatively good way of kind of managing Q&A as well. So we had some really good conversations and some decent discussion, and it was really interesting to compare notes across organizations, but also across sectors and across nations in terms of, so what have we all experienced in the last few months? How have we all responded to it? What can we learn from one another? What can we learn from outside housing altogether? And it was quite uplifting in lots and lots of ways, because I think we established actually that a lot of us were unable to make a lot of change probably more quickly than we thought we could do it. And a bit like the kind of everybody in moment now, the housing sector itself is at a moment, and it's a moment where we need to be really, really mindful, because actually there's some really cool questions to ask ourselves. So what have we managed to do in the last 2 or 3 months that we maybe never thought we would be able to do, or not thought we wouldn't be able to do so fast, that we now want to keep? You know, we don't want to go back. What have we stopped doing that we don't ever want to go back to? So I can tell you already that CIH, we used to push quite a lot of paper around the office to make our finances work. Well, it turns out when you haven't got an office, you can't push paper around. So that's a habit we need to get. Yeah. And what have we had to do in the last few weeks and months that has been necessary, but that we don't want to keep as a permanent state of affairs? So, for instance, the degree to which housing organisations have had to operate something approaching a kind of a skeleton service. You know, we want to get back to offering people the full service they were used to. That's something we don't want to hold on to. So that kind of reflection about the speed of change, what we've changed, what we want to keep, what we want to lose, and what we want to move back to, was a really, really important conversation to have.
Yeah, and what was the common thread of that conversation around the highlight of what you want to keep?
I think the highlight of what everybody from every jurisdiction and every kind of organisation said was, there's nothing like a crisis to get stuff done. We did stuff because we had to do it, and we surprised ourselves. And we surprised ourselves with the speed at which we were able to move, and we surprised ourselves with the degree to which we were able to change our mindset, to say, yes, we can do stuff, and we have to change, and we have to change quickly, and that's good. And I think everybody said that we've amazed ourselves, and we don't want to lose that. Now, actually, outside of those conversations, I was having a conversation elsewhere where somebody said to me that they know a housing association in England that had been on a long-term strategy to change their IT platforms to support much more home working, much more flexible, agile working. And they thought it was an 18-month to 2-year program. They did it in 4 days.
Yeah,
because
there you go.
They had to. And having found out that a thing that you thought was going to take you 2 years, and a huge project infrastructure and lots of plans and bits of paper, and doing all that in 4 days, well, why would you want to lose that spirit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that speed, is extraordinary. And if we can do that, what else can we do if we move like that? So that was the thing that I think everybody said. Yeah, we have found things in ourselves that we didn't know were there.
Yeah. So I think the natural assumption is that people generally are change resistant. So I think what I just heard there is that maybe people think that change mightn't be such the bad thing it used to be.
And yeah, I hope so. And I think we've seen that ourselves as an organisation. Professional body is not renowned for. We're not like internet startups. We're quite old. We're maybe a bit slow sometimes, a bit cautious. But we changed things quite early on in the pandemic, and we did things that only months before we were telling ourselves couldn't be done. So, for instance, one of the things that CIH does is we are the UK's got a government-backed apprenticeship scheme. And we are an apprenticeship provider, and we run the endpoint assessments, the kind of assessments at the end of the apprenticeship process. And these were always done as physical meetings with the apprentice and 2 or 3 people on a panel doing the assessment. And we set great store on the fact that you have a really thorough and honest conversation, and that part of that is to do with being in a room, and that adds a certain quality. Within weeks of the lockdown, we'd started to do these things online. We told ourselves that they couldn't be done online. Turns out they can be done online. They work fine. We can do them fast. That was, I think if you'd have told my colleagues and at CIH a year ago that that's what we were going to do, they wouldn't have believed you.
No.
Now they won't believe that we didn't do it sooner.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've got we pushed our mentoring program to a full virtual mentoring program, and we've got 20 odd people involved in that program. We've got a mentor in New Zealand and a mentee in Perth on the other side of Australia. Just proof that the technology can actually bring us together, which I think is a sideline benefit.
Yeah, I think that's right. And actually, with the online conferences we were talking about before as well, I don't think, if you'd have said to me this time last year, you'll have run an international housing summit entirely online with 200 plus attendees and not a physical venue in sight. I think I'd have said, well, I don't know. I'm not sure we can do it. I don't know what the market would do about it. I don't know if it's technically possible. We changed that in 8 weeks.
Yeah. And look, I think we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves, Gavin, because like internet startups, we're sitting at home in our jeans and our black gear, and you've got your dog under your desk, as I understand.
I've got my dog under the desk. Yeah, he hasn't expressed a view so far, but it's possible.
That's right. Yeah. Well, look, we're just coming up to time, Gavin. So I just want to thank you. I think it's a really important start of probably a longer conversation that you and I can have around how our sectors can learn from one another, or our geography, our members can learn from one another. I think there's many things that we share as common pursuits, and there's probably things that we can learn off each other. So I want to thank you for giving up your time on your Monday morning to speak with me and to share some of your insight. It's really well received, and I really thank you for that.
No, well, thank you, Martin. Thank you to you as well, because you're giving up. I think your Sunday evening. I'm terrible.
No, Monday evening.
Monday evening. Sorry,
9:30.
Tell I confused time. But no, thank you, because you're giving up time as well. And I agree. These conversations across jurisdictions are really, really important. It's something we've learned in CIH because we operate across the 4 jurisdictions of the UK. We learn from each other and we challenge each other. You see something good happening in one place, and it leads to something better happening somewhere else. So actually taking that logic and expanding it and starting a conversation between us across the globe, I think it's a brilliant thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And again, here's another silver lining in the COVID-19 dark storm. So this is a working model in practice. So Gavin, thanks again for that.
Thank you, Mark.